Hello and welcome. Thank you for finding your way to the Dimension Change podcast. I'm going to use this podcast to try to mathematically and logically prove to you that you've been living in a deconstruction, a literal world built based on a half unit, a half world, if you will. What this podcast intends to do is to show you a way to unify the halves and arrive at a new unified understanding that is more efficient than our current understanding and, more importantly, allows you to see the pattern behind the construct we all live in as never before. I'm going to provide you with a mathematically proven, AI-confirmed new model for dimensions that you can also simply prove for yourself. It is verifiable, reproducible mathematical truth. But first, let me give you a useful analogy so you can get an idea of the scope of the information. Imagine you live in a one-bedroom apartment in a foggy city, and everyone you know lives in a one-bedroom apartment, and everyone for hundreds of years has lived in one-bedroom apartments. It's just the way it is. One day, I come knocking on the door, and I say, I have re-examined the original floor plan of your one-bedroom apartment and found something interesting that I think you'd like to know about and would be interested in too. So, being curious and open-minded, you say, sure, come in and tell me all about it. So I go to the back of your one-bedroom apartment, and there's a brown wall panel back there. And I push on a spot on that panel that I calculated, and the panel pops open, and behind the panel is a door. And I open that door, and it leads to another one-bedroom apartment. Exactly like your one-bedroom apartment. So it turns out you were not actually living in a one-bedroom apartment. You were living in half a duplex and never knew it. But it gets even better. Off the back of the second half of that duplex is a stairway that leads to an upper balcony. So you climb the stairs, and from there you can see above the fog and see that the neighbors also have a duplex house, and you see a pattern between the houses. Once you see that pattern, you go back down to look at how your one-bedroom apartment was laid out, and you see the same pattern in your own apartment. It was always there, but you never knew to look for it before. Now that you see the pattern was similar for every duplex and within the duplexes, you can now see a pattern behind the patterns, a meta pattern. Thus, simply by opening that first door from your one-bedroom apartment, you were able to come to new realizations and new understandings never conceived of before. In this analogy, you are a human with the conventional concept of space. The one-bedroom apartment is the conventional radius-based system of science using 2 pi r, pi r squared, 2/3 pi r, 4/3 pi r cubed, and integral calculus, geometry, and all dependent sciences. The duplex is the new model for dimensions, which unifies the halves into a 33% more efficient model for space. The neighbor's house is mass and the periodic table of elements. The pattern it follows is very similar to the model for space and is called the dimension model of mass. The new pattern behind both duplexes is the generalized new model for dimensions. The pattern you saw by looking at the conventional radius-based system, your one-bedroom apartment, through the lens of the Generalized New Model for Dimensions was the new model for radius dimensions. The new model for radius dimensions is also 33% more efficient than the conventional radius-based system. Furthermore, the new model for radius dimensions is the pattern behind integral calculus. And it only requires 2 equations to express all 3 dimensions. The pattern behind the patterns of the new model for dimensions, the dimension model for mass, the generalized new model for dimensions, and the new model for radius dimensions is the meta model for space and mass. So if you follow this podcast, I will show you with mathematical certainty how to understand dimensions in a new, different, and expanded way. Thank you for watching and for your interest. And like this video if you think that others would be interested in it too. And subscribe if you want to learn more about the new way to see dimensions. All of this, with references and so very much more, are located at birdwell.com. That's BYRDWELL.com. Thank you.